The Idaho Statesman has chosen the Chinese settlement of Boise and Idaho City in the 19th century as one of its top 50 stories since the paper's founding in 1864. Arthur Hart has written a book about those settlers. Hart is a longtime Statesman history columnist and the director emeritus of the Idaho State Historical Society. What first brought Chinese settlers to our area?
Chinese first came to America primarily because they had to get out of China to keep from starving to death. They were sojourners wherever they went. They always intended to go back to China, but they went to Australia, they went to South America, and the gold rush to California in 1848 and 49 got them started coming here. And at first they were welcome because cheap labor was needed in California. After they'd been here a while, then they began to be not as welcome. And when the California gold rush petered out and there wasn't enough work, they went to other parts of the country. They helped build the Transcontinental Railway, for example, and they built the difficult part. The mostly Irishmen who built across the Great Plains had nothing tough at all compared to what the Chinese had coming through the Sierra Mountains. So when gold was discovered in Idaho, first in 1860 up north, and in 1862 in Boise Basin, there was a lot of, again, need for cheap labor. Now, these Chinese didn't come over as individuals. They came over sponsored by a company. They're being fed, and once they had paid off that debt to the mother company that brought them, then they hoped to make enough money to go back home and marry the girl that their family had chosen for them. These are almost all young men, and there were tens of thousands of them. In fact, when the first census was taken in Idaho in 1870, there were more Chinese than all other nationalities combined.
White settlers in Boise liked the Chinese gardens, which endured until the mid-20th century.
Almost all the mining camps, including Boise, which wasn't a mining camp, had Chinese laundries. And so the Chinese took in white women's laundry. Chinese opened restaurants very early on. Chinese cooks were the cooks in lumber camps, in cattle camps. Chinese apparently would fit into wherever they could possibly be needed. Wealthier families here in Boise all had Chinese servants. You might have a Chinese who would take care of the children, for example, or Chinese who would do your gardening. And if they lived in-house with the family, they were treated almost like a member of the family.
For the most part, though, white Boiseans didn't think much of the Chinese.
Their names are inaccurate in the census because the census taker, speaking to a translator, would say, what's his name? And the Chinese would reply, Ah Fong. And that's how their name is in the telephone book today. Dick Ah Fong is a friend of mine, but Ah means that one is. So when you say Ah Fong, you mean he is or that is Mr. Fong. By the end of the 1880s, the Chinese were not wanted anywhere in the West. And so we had a series of Chinese exclusion acts. If you were here before a certain date, you could stay. But you had to be registered, you had to have papers, you had what was the equivalent of a passport with your photograph on it.
Most Boise area people of Chinese descent today are more recent immigrants, professionals who work for companies like Micron and Hewlett-Packard, raising families here. But a few were descendants of those original immigrants a century and a half ago.
A couple of the Chinese restaurants are operated by descendants of those people. Andy Louie, who did the calligraphy in my book, is a descendant of one of those earliest people here. Everybody knows Garden City is named for Chinese gardens, and that Chinden Boulevard is contraction of Chinese and garden.
Dave Stotts, Idaho Statesman.